Hi. Welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. I know you can understand what I'm saying because I'm speaking slowly, unlike the normal introducer who tries to say things as fast as he possibly can at the very beginning of the live stream. So, I'm just... Oh, look, somebody showed up and I see a heart. Hi, Jessica. Nice to see you. We are going to finish chapter 5, and it is going to be a maelstrom of me trying to read as quickly as possible in order to get through it with a reasonable time frame. All right, so this is Esther chapter 6. We're in the English Standard Version of the Bible. We're going to start off with a Bible reading, and then we will continue on with the synopsis and the rest of everything. Just a minute, I'm going to turn off my notifications. Mm-hmm. All right, there we go. All right, this is Esther chapter 6, English Standard Version, verse 1. On that night the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." And the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that had been prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, "Haman is there standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" And Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai, and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him." And ironically, the very last, this is sort of like when you're watching a TV show and they have a sneak preview, the very last verse is actually connected to the next chapter, but it's a sneak preview for tomorrow. So it says, "While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared." So there is your sneak preview to tell you what's in store for you on tomorrow's episode in the book of Esther, when we read Esther chapter 7 tomorrow. And Esther chapter 6 was quite good because Haman kind of didn't get the what he was expecting. All right, so, and Mordecai got something that he wasn't expecting either. So there it is. All right. Okay. All right, so now you can put that down. All right, so now we are in Princess Bride chapter 5, as we have been for the last 3 days. And let me tell you what happened yesterday. So, yesterday we learned all about Fezzik. His parents were rotten people, and they wanted him to be a fighter, and he didn't want to be a fighter. He wanted to rhyme, and they made him fight, and then I think he was in China or somewhere. He went to Greenland, and anyway, he joined the circus, and they fired him from the circus, and then Vicini hired him, and so he works for Vicini now. So that's the synopsis, very short version of what happened with Fezzik. If you want to know more, listen to yesterday's episode. What?
He beat him.
Who beat him?
The Man in Black.
The man. Oh yeah, okay. And the Man in Black beat Fezzik. So, I mean, not really that amazing, but I mean, I'm just joking. Fezzik was fighting more than one person at a time, and probably because the Man in Black was only one. That's probably the only reason that the Man in Black could get away, because Fezzik was just used to just fighting like a dozen people at a time. All right, so here we are. If you want to know more, listen to yesterday's live stream, because I read the entire thing and stumbled through it pretty badly, actually. All right, so this is the conclusion of The Princess Bride Chapter 5, which is, I don't even remember what this chapter is called anymore because it's so long. I think that, yeah, I don't even know. That's 4, 5. The Announcement is what it's called. Wow. Okay, this is one announcement, right? Okay.
It's the wedding announcement.
Yeah, way back at the beginning of the chapter was a wedding announcement. All right, here we go. All right. Vicini was waiting for him. Indeed, he had set out a little picnic spread. From the knapsack that he always carried, he had taken a small handkerchief, and on it he had placed 2 wine goblets. In the center was a small leather wine holder, and beside it some cheese and some apples. The spot could not have been lovelier, a high point of the mountain path, with a splendid view all the way back to the Florin Channel. Buttercup lay helpless beside the picnic, gagged and tied and blindfolded. Vicini held his long knife against her white throat. "Welcome," Vicini called when the Man in Black was almost upon them. The Man in Black stopped and surveyed the situation. "You've beaten my Turk," Vicini said. "It would seem so. And now it is down to you, and it is down to me." "So that would seem too," the Man in Black said, edging just a half-step closer to the hunchback's long knife. With a smile, the hunchback pushed the knife harder against Buttercup's throat. It was about to bring blood. "If you wish her dead, by all means, keep moving," Vicini said. The Man in Black froze. "Better?" Vicini nodded. No sound now beneath the moonlight. "I understand completely what you are trying to do," the Sicilian said finally, "and I want it quite clear that I resent your behavior. You are trying to kidnap what I have rightfully stolen, and I think it quite ungentlemanly." "Let me explain," the Man in Black began, starting to edge forward. "You're killing her!" the Sicilian screamed, shoving harder with the knife. A drop of blood appeared now at Buttercup's throat, red against white. The Man in Black retreated. "Let me explain," he said again, but from a distance. Again the hunchback interrupted. "There is nothing you can tell me I do not already know. I have not had the schooling equal to some, but for knowledge outside of books there is no one in the world close to me. People say I read minds, but that is not, in all honesty, true. I merely predict the truth using logic and wisdom. And I say you're a kidnapper. Admit it." "I will admit that, as a ransom item, she has value, nothing more." "I have been instructed to do certain things to her. It is very important that I follow my instructions. If I do this properly, I will be in demand for life, and my instructions do not include ransom. They include death. So your explanations are meaningless. We cannot do business together. You wish to keep her alive for ransom, whereas it is terribly important to me that she stop breathing in the very near future." "Has it occurred to you that I have gone to great effort and expense as well as personal sacrifice to reach this point?" the Man in Black replied. and that if I fail now, I might get very angry, and if she stops breathing in the very near future, it is entirely possible that you will catch the same fatal illness. I have no doubt that you could kill me. Any man who could get by Inigo and Fezzik would have no trouble disposing of me. However, has it occurred to you that if you did that, then neither of us would get what we want, you having lost your ransom item, me my life?" "We are at an impasse, then," said the man in black. "I fear so," said the Sicilian. "I cannot compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brains." "You're that smart? There are no words to contain all my wisdom. I am so cunning, crafty, and clever, so filled with deceit, guile, and chicanery, such a knave, so shrewd, cagey, as well as calculating, as diabolical as I am vulpine, as tricky as I am untrustworthy. Well, I told you there were no words invented yet to explain how great my brain is. But let me put it this way. The world is several million years old, and several billion people have at one time or another trod upon it. But I, Vicini the Sicilian, am, speaking with pure candor and modesty, the slickest, sleekest, slyest, and wiliest fellow who has yet come down the pike." "In that case," said the man in black, "I challenge you to a battle of wits." Vicini had to smile. "For the princess? You read my mind. It just seems that way, I told you. It's merely logic and wisdom. To the death?" "Correct again." "I accept," cried Vicini. "Begin the battle." "Pour the wine," said the man in black. Vicini filled the 2 goblets with deep red liquid. The man in black pulled from his dark clothing a small packet and handed it to the hunchback. "Open it and inhale it, but be careful, do not touch." Vicini took the packet and followed instructions. "I smell nothing." The man in black took the packet again. "What you do not smell is called iocane powder. It is odorless, tasteless, and dissolves immediately in any kind of liquid. It also happens to be the deadliest poison known to man." Vicini was beginning to get excited. "I don't suppose you'd hand me the goblets," said the man in black. Vicini shook his head. "Take them yourself. My long knife does not leave her throat." The man in black reached down for the goblets. He took them and turned away. Vicini cackled aloud in anticipation. The man in black busied himself a long moment. Then he turned again with a goblet in each hand. Very carefully he put the goblet in his right hand in front of Vicini, and put the goblet in his left hand across the kerchief from the hunchback. He sat down in front of the left-hand goblet and dropped the empty iocane packet by the cheese. "Your guess," he said. "Where is the poison?" "Guess?" Vicini cried. "I don't guess. I think, I ponder, I deduce, then I decide. But I never guess." "The battle of wits has begun," said the man in black. "It ends when you decide, and we drink the wine, and find out who is right and who is dead. We both drink, need I add, and swallow, naturally, at precisely the same time." "But it's all so simple," said the hunchback. "All I have to do is deduce from what I know of you, the way your mind works. Are you the kind of man who would put the poison into his own glass, or into the glass of his enemy?" "You're stalling," said the man in black. "I'm relishing in what I'm doing," answered the Sicilian. "No one has challenged my mind in years, and I love it. By the way, may I smell both goblets? Be my guest. Just be sure you put them down the same way you found them." The Sicilian sniffed his own glass. Then he reached across the kerchief for the goblet of the man in black and sniffed that. "As you said, odorless. As I also said, you're stalling." The Sicilian smiled and stared at the wine goblets. "Now a great fool," he began, "would place the wine in his own goblet, because he would know that only another great fool would reach for what he was given. I am clearly not a great fool, so I will clearly not reach for your wine." "That's your final choice?" "No, because you know I'm not a great fool, so you would know that I would never fall for such a trick. You would count on it, so I will clearly not reach for mine either." "Keep going," said the man in black. I intend to. The Sicilian reflected a moment. We have now decided the poison cup is most likely in front of you, but the poison is powder made from iocane, and iocane comes only from Australia. And Australia, as everyone knows, is peopled with criminals, and criminals are used to having people not trust them, as I don't trust you, which means I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. The man in black was starting to get nervous. But again, you must have suspected I knew the origins of iocane, so you would have known I knew about the criminals and criminal behavior, and therefore I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me. Truly, you have a dizzying intellect, whispered the man in black. You have beaten my Turk, which means you are exceptionally strong, and exceptionally strong men are convinced that they are too powerful ever to die, too powerful even for iocane poison. So you could have put it in your own cup, trusting on your strength to save you. Thus I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. The man in black was very nervous now. But you are also bested my Spaniard, which means you must have studied, because he studied many years for his excellence. And if you can study, you are clearly more than simply strong. You are aware of how mortal we all are, and you do not wish to die, so you would have kept the poison as far from yourself as possible. Therefore I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me. You're trying to make me give something away with all this chatter, said the man in black angrily. Well, it won't work. You'll learn nothing from me, that I promise you. I have already learned everything from you, said the Sicilian. I know where the poison is. Only a genius could have deduced as much. How fortunate for me that I happen to be one, said the hunchback, growing more and more amused now. You cannot frighten me, said the man in black, but there was a fear all through his voice. Shall we drink then? Pick, choose. Quit dragging it out. You don't know. You couldn't know. The Sicilian only smiled at the outburst. Then a strange look crossed his features, and he pointed off behind the man in black. What in the world can that be? He asked. The man in black turned around and looked. I don't see anything. Oh, well, I could have sworn I saw something. No matter. The Sicilian began to laugh. I don't understand what's so funny, said the man in black. Tell me in a minute, said the hunchback. But first, let's drink. And he picked up his own wine goblet. The man in black picked up the one in front of him. They drank. You guessed wrong, said the man in black. Hey, you only think I guessed wrong, said the Sicilian, his laughter ringing louder. That's what's so funny. I switched glasses when your back was turned. There was nothing for the man in black to say. Fool, cried the hunchback. You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is, never get involved in a land war in Asia, but only slightly well known is this. Never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. He was quite cheery until the iocane powder took effect. The man in black stepped quickly over the corpse, then roughly ripped the blindfold from the princess's eyes. I just want to say that unlike every other scene in this book, this one, I think they almost used it verbatim in the movie.
The rhythm's a little different.
The rhythm is a little bit different, but it is almost verbatim. It is very close.
I think the movie's...
All right. Okay. Are we doing the peanut gallery, or are we going to be quiet?
Tell them the kids are in trouble tonight.
The kids are in trouble tonight. All right. So. And I heard everything that Buttercup began, and then she said, all right, start over. I heard everything that Buttercup began, and then she said, oh, because she had never been next to a dead man before. You killed him, she whispered finally. I let him die laughing, said the man in black. Pray I do as much for you. He lifted her, slashed her bonds away, put her on her feet, started to pull her along. Please, Buttercup said. Give me a moment to gather myself. The man in black released his grip. Buttercup rubbed her wrists, stopped to massage her ankles. She took a final look at the Sicilian. To think, she murmured, all this time it was your cup that was poisoned. They were both poisoned, said the man in black. I've spent the last 2 years building up immunity to iocane powder. Buttercup, looked up at him. He was terrifying to her, masked and hooded and dangerous. His voice was strained, rough. "Who are you?" she asked. "I am no one to be trifled with," replied the man in black. "That is all you ever need know." And with that he yanked her upright. "You've had your moment." Again he pulled her after him, and this time she could do nothing but follow. They moved along the mountain path. The moonlight was very bright, and there were rocks everywhere, and to Buttercup it all looked dead and yellow like the moon. She had just spent several hours with 3 men who were openly planning to kill her, so why, she wondered, was she more frightened now than then? Who was the horrid hooded figure to strike fear in her so? What could be worse than dying? "I will pay you a great deal of money to release me," she managed to say. The man in black glanced at her. "You are rich, then?" "I will be," Buttercup said. "Whatever you want for ransom, I promise I'll get it for you, if you'll let me go." The man in black just laughed. "I was not speaking in jest. You promise, you! I should release you on your promise. What is that worth, the vow of a woman? Oh, that is very funny, Highness, spoken in jest or not." They proceeded along the mountain path to an open space. The man in black stopped then. There were 1,000,000 stars fighting for prominence, and for a moment he seemed to be intent on nothing less than studying them all, as Buttercup watched his eyes flick from constellation to constellation behind his mask. Then, with no warning, he spun off the path, heading into wild terrain, pulling her behind him. She stumbled. He pulled her to her feet again. Again she fell. Again he righted her. "I cannot move this quickly." "You can, and you will, or you will suffer greatly. Do you think I could make you suffer greatly?" Buttercup nodded. "Then run," said the man in black, and he broke into a run himself, flying across the rocks in the moonlight, pulling the princess behind him. She did her best to keep up. She was frightened as to what he would do to her, so she dared not fall again. After 5 minutes, the man in black stopped dead. "Catch your breath," he commanded. Buttercup nodded, gasped in air, tried to quiet her heart. But then they were off again with no warning, dashing across the mountainous terrain, heading... "Where do you take me?" Buttercup gasped. And when he gave her a chance to rest... Buttercup gasped when he gave her a chance to rest. "Surely, even someone as arrogant as you cannot expect me to give an answer. It does not matter if you tell or not. He will find you." "He, your Highness?" "Prince Humperdinck. There is no greater hunter. He can track a falcon on a cloudy day. He can find you." "You have your confidence that your dearest love will save you, do you?" "I never said he was my dearest love, and yes, he will save me. That I know." "You admit you do not love your husband-to-be, fancy. An honest woman. You are a rare specimen, your Highness." "The prince and I have never, from the beginning, lied to each other. He knows I do not love him." "You are not capable of love, is what you mean." "I am very capable of love," Buttercup said. "Hold your tongue, I think." "I have loved more deeply than a killer like you can possibly imagine." He slapped her. "That is the penalty for lying, your Highness. Where I come from, when a woman lies, she is reprimanded." "But I spoke the truth. I Buttercup saw his hand rise a second time, so she stopped quickly, fell dead silent. Then they began to run again. They did not speak for hours. They just ran, and then, as if he could guess when she was spent, he would stop, release her hand. She would try to catch her breath, for the next dash she was sure would come. Without a sound, he would grab her, and off they would go. It was close to dawn before they saw the Armada. They were running along the edge of a towering ravine. They seemed almost to be at the top of the world. When they stopped, Buttercup sank down to rest. The man in black stood silently over her. "Your love comes not alone," he said then. Buttercup did not understand. The man in black pointed back the way they had come. Buttercup stared, and as she did, the waters of Florin Channel seemed as filled with light as the sky was filled with stars. "He must have ordered every ship in Florin after you," the man in black said. "Such a sight I have never seen." He stared at all the lanterns on all the ships as they moved. You can never escape him," Buttercup said. "If you release me, I promise that you will come to no harm." "You are much too generous. I could never accept such an offer." I offered you your life. That was generous enough. Highness, said the man in black, and his hands were suddenly at her throat. If there is talk of life to be done, let me do it. You would not kill me. You would not steal from me, from murderers, to murder me yourself. Wise as well as loving, said the man in black. He jerked her to her feet, and they ran along the edge of the great ravine. It was hundreds of feet deep, and filled with rocks and trees and lifting shadows. Abruptly, the man in black stopped, staring back at the armada. To be honest, he said, I had not expected quite so many. You can never predict, my prince. That is why he is the greatest hunter. I wonder, said the man in black, will he stay in one group, or will he divide, some to search the coastline, some to follow your path on land? What do you think? I only know he will find me, and if you have not given me my freedom first, he will not treat you gently. Surely he must have discussed things with you, the thrill of the hunt. What has he done in the past with many ships? We do not discuss hunting, that I can assure you. Not hunting, not love. What do you talk about? We do not see all that much of each other. Tender couple. Buttercup could feel the upset coming. We are always very honest with each other. Not everyone can say as much. May I please tell you something, your highness? You're very cold. I'm not. Very cold and very young, and if you live, I think you'll turn to a hoarfrost. Why do you pick at me? I have come to terms with my life, and that is my affair. I am not cold, I swear, but I have decided certain things. It is best for me to ignore emotion. I have not been happy dealing with it. Her heart was a secret garden, and the walls were very high. I loved once, Buttercup said after a moment. It worked out badly. Another rich man? Yes, and he left you for a richer woman? No, poor, and it killed him. Were you sorry? Did you feel pain? Admit that you felt nothing. Do not mock my grief. I died that day. The armada began to fire signal cannons. The explosions echoed through the mountains. The man in black stared as the ships began to change formation, and while he was watching the ships, Buttercup shoved him with all her strength remaining. For a moment the man in black teetered at the ravine edge. His arms spun like windmills, fighting for balance. They swung and gripped the air, and then he began his slide. Down went the man in black, stumbling and torn and reaching out to stop his descent, but the ravine was too steep, and nothing could be done. Down, down. Rolling over rocks, spinning out of control, Buttercup stared at what she had done. Finally he rested far below her, silent and without motion. You can die too, for all I care, she said, and then she turned away. Words followed her, whispered from far, weak and warm and familiar. As you wish. Dawn in the mountains. Buttercup turned back to the source of the sound and stared down as, in first light, the man in black struggled to remove his mask. "Oh, my sweet Wesley," Buttercup said, "what have I done to you now?" From the bottom of the ravine there came only silence. Buttercup hesitated not a moment. Down she went after him, keeping her feet as best she could, and as she began she thought she heard him crying out to her over and over, but she could not make sense of his words, because inside her now there was the thunder of walls crumbling, and that was noise enough. Beside her balance quickly was gone, and the ravine had her. She fell fast, and she fell hard, but what did it matter, since she would have gladly dropped 1,000 feet into a bed of nails if Wesley had been waiting at the bottom. Down, down, tossed and spinning, crashing, torn, out of all control, she rolled and twisted and plunged, cartwheeling toward what was left of her beloved. From her position at the point of the armada, Prince Humperdinck stared up at the cliffs of insanity. This was just like any other hunt. He made himself think away the quarry. It did not matter if you were after an antelope or a bride-to-be, the procedures held. You gathered evidence, then you acted. You studied, then you performed. If you studied too little, the chances were strong that your actions would also be too late. You had to take time, and so, frozen in thought, he continued to stare up the sheer face of the cliffs. Obviously, someone had recently climbed them. There were foot scratchings all the way up a straight line, which meant most certainly a rope, an arm-over-arm climb up a 1,000-foot rope with occasional foot kicks for balance. To make such a climb required both strength and planning, so the prince made those marks in his brain. My enemy is strong, my enemy is not impulsive. Now his eyes reached the point perhaps 300 feet from the top. Here it began to get interesting. Now the foot scratchings were deeper, more frequent, and they followed no direct ascending line. Either someone left the rope 300 feet from the top intentionally, which made no sense, or the rope was cut while someone was still 300 feet from safety, for clearly this last part of the climb was made up the rock face itself. But who had such talent, and why had he been called to exercise it at such a deadly time, 700 feet above disaster? I must examine the tops of the cliffs of insanity, the prince said, without bothering to turn. From behind him, Count Rugen only said, "Done," and awaited further instructions. Send half the armada south along the coastline, the other north. They should meet by twilight near the fire swamp. Our ship will sail to the first landing possibility, and you will follow me with your soldiers. Ready the whites." Count Rugen signaled the cannoneer, and the prince's instructions boomed along the cliffs. Within minutes the armada had begun to split, with only the prince's giant ship sailing alone closest to the coastline, looking for a landing possibility. "There," the prince ordered, some time later, and his ship began maneuvering into the cove for a safe place to anchor. That took time, but not much, because the captain was skilled, and more than that, the prince was quick to lose patience. And no one dared risk that. Humperdinck jumped from ship to shore, a plank was lowered, and the whites were led to ground. Of all his accomplishments, none pleased the prince as did these horses. Some day he would have an army of them, but getting the bloodlines perfect was a slow business. He now had 4 whites, and they were identical. Snowy, tireless giants, 20 hands high. On flat land, nothing could catch them, and even on hills and rocky terrain there was nothing short of Araby close to their equal. The prince, when rushed, rode all 4 bareback, the only way he ever rode, riding 1, leading 3, changing beasts in mid-stride so that no single animal had to bear his bulk to the tiring point. Now he mounted, and he was gone. It took him considerably less than an hour to reach the edge of the cliffs of insanity. He dismounted, went to his knees, commenced his study of the terrain. There had been a rope tied around a great giant oak. The bark at the base was broken and scraped, so probably whoever first reached the top untied the rope, and whoever was on the rope at the moment was 300 feet from the peak and somehow survived the climb. A great jumble of footprints caused him trouble. It was hard to ascertain what had gone on. Perhaps a conference, because 2 sets of footprints seemed to lead off, while one remained pacing the cliff edge. Then there were 2 on the cliff edge. Humperdinck examined the prince until he was certain of 2 things. A fencing match had taken place. The combatants were both masters. The stride length, the quickness of the foot feints, all clearly revealed to his unfailing eye, made him reassess his second conclusion. They were at least masters, probably better. Then he closed his eyes and concentrated on smelling out the blood. Surely, in the match of such ferocity, blood must have been spilled. Now it was a matter of giving his entire body over to his sense of smell. The prince had worked at this for many years, ever since a wounded tigress had surprised him from a tree climb while he was tracking her. He had let his eyes follow the blood hunt then, and it had almost killed him. Now he trusted only his olfactories. If there was blood within 100 yards, he would find it. He opened his eyes, moved without hesitation toward a group of large boulders until he found the blood drops. There were few of them, and they were dry, but less than 3 hours old. Humperdinck smiled. When you had whites under you, 3 hours was a finger snap. He retraced the duel then, for it confused him. It seemed to range from cliff edge and back, then return to the cliff edge, and sometimes the left foot seemed to be leading, sometimes the right, which made no logical sense at all. Clearly swordsmen were changing hands, but why would a master do that, unless his good arm was wounded to the point of uselessness, and that clearly had not happened, because the wound of that depth would have left blood spores, and there was simply not enough blood in that area to indicate that. Strange, strange. Humperdinck continued his wanderings. Stranger still, the battle could not have ended in death. He knelt by the outline of a body. Clearly a man had lain unconscious here, but again no blood. "There was a mighty duel," Prince Humperdinck said, directing his comment toward Count Rugen, who had finally caught up together with a contingent of 100 mounted men-at-arms. "My guess would be," and for a moment the prince paused, following footsteps, "would be that whoever fell here ran off there," and he pointed one way, "and that whoever was the victor ran off along the mountain path in almost precisely the opposite direction. It is also my opinion that the victor was following the path taken by the princess." "Shall we follow them both?" the count asked. "I think not," Prince Humperdinck replied. "Whoever is gone is of minimal importance, since whoever has the princess is the one we're after, whoever we're after, and because we don't know the nature of the trap we might be being led into, we need all the arms we have in one band. Clearly this has been planned by countrymen of Gilder, and nothing must ever be put past them." "You think this is a trap, then?" the count asked. "I always think everything is a trap until proven otherwise," the prince answered, "which is why I'm still alive." And with that he was back aboard a white and galloping. And when he reached the mountain path where the hand fight happened, the prince did not even bother dismounting. Everything that could be seen was quite visible from horseback. "Someone has beaten a giant," he said, when the count was close enough. "The giant has run away. Do you see?" The count, of course, saw nothing but rock and mountain path. "I would not think to doubt you." "And look here," cried the prince, because now he saw for the first time in the rubble of the mountain path the footsteps of a woman. "The princess is alive." And again the whites were thundering across the mountain. When the count caught up with him again, the prince was kneeling over the still body of the hunchback. The count dismounted. "Smell this," the prince said, and he handed up a goblet. "Nothing," the count said. "No odor at all." "Iocane," the prince replied. "I would bet my life on it. I know of nothing else that kills so silently." He stood up then. "The princess was still alive. Her footprints follow the path," he shouted at the 100 mounted men. "There will be great suffering in Gilder if she dies." On foot now, he ran along the mountain path, following the footsteps that he alone could see. And when those footsteps left the path for wilder terrain, he followed still. Strung out behind him, the count and all the soldiers did their best to keep up. Men stumbled, horses fell, even the count tripped from time to time. Prince Humperdinck never even broke stride. He ran steadily, mechanically, his barrel legs pumping like a metronome. It was 2 hours after dawn when he reached the steep ravine. "Odd," he said to the count, who was tiring badly. The count continued only to breathe deeply. "2 bodies fell to the bottom, and they did not come back up." "That is odd," the count managed. "No, that isn't what's odd," the prince corrected. "Clearly the kidnapper did not come back up because the climb was too steep. And our cannons must have let him know that we were closely pursued. His decision, which I applaud, was to make better time running along the ravine floor." The count waited for the prince to continue. "It's just odd that a man who is master fencer and defeater of a giant, an expert in the use of iocane powder, would not know what this ravine opens into." "And what is that?" asked the count. "The fire swamp," said Prince Humperdinck. "Then we have him," said the count. "Precisely so." It was a well-documented trait of his to smile only just before the kill. His smile was very much in evidence now. Wesley, indeed, had not the least idea that he was racing dead into the fire swamp. He knew only once Buttercup was down at the ravine bottom beside him that to climb out would take, as Prince Humperdinck had assumed, too much time. Wesley noted only that the ravine bottom was flat rock and heading into the general direction he wanted to follow, so he and Buttercup fled along, both of them very much aware that gigantic forces were following them, and undoubtedly cutting into their lead. The ravine grew increasingly sheer as they went along, and Wesley soon realized that whereas once he probably could have helped her through the climb, now there was simply no way of doing so. He had made his choice, and there was no changing possible. Wherever the ravine led was his destination, and that, quite simply, was that. At this point in the story, my wife wants it known that she feels violently cheated not being allowed the scene of reconciliation on the ravine floor between the lovers. My reply to her. And here's italics. This is me, and I'm not trying to be confusing, but the above paragraph that I'm cutting into now is verbatim. Morgenstern. He was continually referring to his wife in the unabridged book, saying that she loved the next section, or that she thought that, all in all, the book was extraordinarily brilliant. Mrs. Morgenstern was rarely anything but supportive to her husband, unlike some wives I could mention. Sorry about that, Helen. But here's the thing. I got rid of almost all the intrusions when he told us what she thought. I didn't think the device added a whole lot, and besides, he was always complimenting himself through her, and today we know that hyping something too much does more harm than good, as any defeated political candidate will tell you when he pays his television bills. The thing of it is, I left this particular reference in because for once I totally happened to agree with Mrs. Morgenstern. I think it was unfair not to show the reunion. So I wrote one of my own, what I felt Buttercup and Wesley might have said. But Hiram, my editor, felt that made me just as unfair as Morgenstern here. If you're going to abridge a book in the author's own words, you can't go around sticking your own in. That was Hiram's point. And we really went round and round arguing over, I guess, a period of a month in person, through letters on the phone. Finally, we compromised to this extent. This, what you're reading in the regular type, is strict Morgenstern, verbatim. Cut? Yes. Changed? No. But I got Hiram to agree that Harcourt would at least print up my scene. Ballantyne has agreed to do the same. It's all of 3 pages, big deal. And if any of you wants to see what it came out like, drop a note or postcard or Urban Del Rey at Ballantyne Books, 201 East 50th Street, New York City, and just mention you'd like the reunion scene. Don't forget to include your return address. You'd be stunned at how many people send in for things and don't put their return address down. The publishers agreed to spring for the postage costs, so your total expense is the note card or whatever. It would really upset me if I turned out to be the only modern American writer who gave the impression that he was with a generous publishing house. They all stink. Sorry about that, Mr. Yovanovitch. So let me just add here that the reason they are so generous in paying this giant postage bill is because they fully expect nobody to write in. So please, if you have the least interest at all, or even if you don't, write in for my reunion scene. You don't have to read it. I'm not asking that. But I would love to cost those publishing geniuses a few dollars. Because let's face it, they're not spending much on advertising my books. Let me just repeat the address for you, zip code and all. Urban Del Rey, Ballantyne Books, 201 East 50th Street, New York, New York, 10022. And just ask for your copy of the reunion scene. This has gone on longer than I planned, so I'm going to repeat the Morgenstern paragraph I interrupted. It'll read better over and out. At this point in the story, my wife wants it known that she feels violently cheated not being allowed the scene of reconciliation on the ravine floor between the lovers. My reply to her is simply this. Each of God's beings, from the lowliest on up, is entitled to at least a few minutes of genuine privacy. What actually was spoken, while moving enough to those involved at the actual time, flattens like toothpaste when transferred to paper for later reading. My dove, my only, bliss, bliss, etc. Nothing of importance in an expository way was related, because every time Buttercup began, "Tell me about yourself," Wesley quickly cut her off with, "Later, beloved. Now is not the time. However, it should be noted in all fairness to all that, number 1, he did not weep. Number 2, her eyes did not remain precisely dry. Number 3, there was more than one embrace. And number 4, both parties admitted that, without any qualifications whatsoever, they were more than a little glad to see each other. Besides, number 5, within a quarter of an hour they were arguing. It began quite innocently, the two of them kneeling, facing each other, Wesley holding her perfect face in his quick hands. "When I left you," he whispered, "you were already more beautiful than anything I dared to dream. In our years apart, my imaginings did their best to improve on your perfection. At night your face was forever behind my eyes, and now I see that that vision who kept me company in my loneliness was a hag compared to the beauty now before me." "Enough about my beauty," Buttercup said. "Everybody always talks about how beautiful I am. I've got a mind, Wesley. Talk about that." "Throughout eternity I shall do that very thing," he told her. "But now we haven't time." He made it to his feet. The ravine fall had shaken and battered him, but all his bones survived the trip uncracked. He helped her to her feet. "Wesley," Buttercup said, "just before I started down after you, while I was still up there, I could hear you saying something, but the words were indistinct. I've forgotten whatever it was. Terrible liar." He smiled at her and kissed her cheek. "It's not important, believe me. The past has a way of being past. We must not begin with secrets from each other." She meant it. He could tell that. "Trust me," he said. "I do. So tell me the words, or I shall be given reason not to." Wesley sighed. "What I was trying to get through to you, beloved sweet, what I was, as a matter of accurate fact, shouting with everything I had left, was, whatever you do, stay up there. Don't come down here, please." "You didn't want to see me?" "Of course I wanted to see you. I just didn't want to see you down here." "Why ever not?" "Because now, my precious, we're more or less kind of trapped. I can't climb out of here and bring you with me without taking all day. I can get out myself, most likely, without it taking all day, but with the addition of your lovely bulk, it's not about to happen."
Oh my God.
"Nonsense. You climbed the cliffs of insanity, and this isn't nearly that steep. And it took a little out of me, too, let me tell you. And after that little effort I tangled with a fella who knew a little something about fencing. And after that I spent a few happy moments grappling with a giant. And after that I had to outfake a Sicilian to death when any mistake meant it was a knife in the throat for you. And after what I've run my lungs out a couple of hours. And after that I was pushed 200 feet down a rock ravine. I'm tired. Buttercup, do you understand? Tired. I've put in a night, is what I'm trying to get through to you. I'm not stupid, you know. Quit bragging. Stop being rude. When was the last time you read a book? The truth now. And picture books don't count. I mean something with print in it. Buttercup walked away from him. There's other things to read than print, she said, and the Princess of Hammersmith is displeased with you, and is thinking seriously of going home. With no more words, she whirled into his arms, then saying, "Oh, Wesley, I didn't mean that. I didn't. Not a single syllable of it." Now Wesley knew that she meant to say, "Not a single syllable of it," because a syllabub is something you ate, with cream and wine mixed in together to form the base. But he also knew an apology when he heard one. So he held her very close and shut his loving eyes and only whispered, "I knew it was false, believe me, every single syllabub." And that out of the way, they started running as fast as they could along the flat rock floor of the ravine. Wesley, naturally enough, was considerably ahead of Buttercup with the realization that they were heading into the fire swamp. Whether it was a touch of sulphur riding in breeze or a flick of yellow flame far ahead in the daylight, he could not say for sure, but once he realized what was about to happen, he began as casually as possible to find a way to avoid it. A quick glance up the sheer ravine sides ruled out any possibility of his getting Buttercup past the climb. He dropped to the ground as he had been doing every few minutes to test the speed of their trackers. Now he guessed them to be less than half an hour behind and gaining. He rode and ran with her faster of them spending breath in conversation. It was only a matter of time before she understood what they were about to be into, so he decided to beat back her panic in any way possible. "I think we can slow down a bit now," he told her, slowing down a bit. "They're still well behind." Buttercup took a deep breath of relief. Wesley made a show of checking their surroundings. Then he gave her his best smile. "With any luck at all," he said, "we should soon be safely in the fire swamp." Buttercup heard his speech, of course, but she did not take it well. A few words now on two related subjects. Number 1, fire swamps in general, and number 2, the Florin Gilder fire swamp in particular. Number 1. Fire swamps are, of course, entirely misnamed. As to why this has happened, no one knows, though probably the colorful quality of the two words together is enough. Simply, there are swamps which contain a large percentage of sulfur and other gas bubbles that burst continually into flame. They are covered with lush giant trees that shadow the ground, making the flame burst seem particularly dramatic. Because they are dark, they are almost always quite moist, therefore attracting the standard insect and alligator communities that prefers a moist climate. In other words, a fire swamp is just a swamp, period. The rest is embroidery. Number 2. The Florin Gilder fire swamp did and does have some peculiar odd characteristics. A. The existence of snow sand, and B. The presence of the ROUS, about which a bit more later. Snow sand is usually, again, incorrectly identified with lightning sand. Nothing could be less accurate. Lightning sand is moist and basically destroys by drowning. Snow sand is as powdery as anything short of talcum and destroys by suffocation. Are we good? Most particularly, though, the Florin Gilder fire swamp was used to frighten children. There was not a child in either country then at one time or another was not, when misbehaving very badly, threatened with abandonment in the fire swamp. "Do that one more time, you're going to the fire swamp," is as common as, "Clean your plate, people are starving in China." And so, as children grew, so did the danger of the fire swamp in their enlarging imaginations. No one, of course, ever actually went into the fire swamp, although every year or so a deceased ROUS might wander out to die, and its discovery would only add to the myth and the horror. The largest known fire swamp is, of course, within a day's drive of Perth. It is impenetrable and over 25 miles square. The one between Florin and Gilder was barely a third that size. No one had ever been able to discover if it was impenetrable or not. Buttercup stared at the fire swamp. As a child, she had once spent an entire nightmared year convinced that she was going to die there. Now she could not move another step. The giant trees blackened the ground ahead of her. From every part came the sudden flames. "You cannot ask it of me," she said. "I must. I once dreamed I would die here." "So did I. So did we all. Were you 8 that year? I was. 8? 6? I can't remember." Wesley took her hand. She could not move. "Must we?" Wesley nodded. "Why?" "Now is not the time." He pulled her gently. She still could not move. Wesley took her in his arms. "Child, sweet child, I have a knife. I have a sword. I did not come across the world to lose you now." Buttercup was searching somewhere for sufficiency of courage. Evidently she found it in his eyes. At any rate, hand in hand, they moved into the shadows of the fire swamp. Prince Humperdinck just stared. He sat astride a white, studying the footsteps down on the floor of the ravine. There was simply no other conclusion. The kidnapper had dragged his princes into it. Count Rugen sat alongside. "Did they actually go in?" The prince nodded. Praying the answer would be no, the count asked, "Do you think that we should follow them?" The prince shook his head. "They'll either live or die in there. If they die, I have no wish to join them. If they live, I'll greet them on the other side." "It's too far around," the count said. "Not for my whites." "We'll follow as best as we can," the count said. He stared again at the fire swamp. He must be very desperate, or very frightened, or very stupid, or very brave. "Very all four, I should think," the prince replied. Wesley led the way. Buttercup stayed just behind, and they made from the outset very good time. The main thing, she realized, was to forget your childhood dreams, for the fire swamp was bad, but it wasn't that bad. The odor of the escaping gases, which at first seemed almost totally punishing, soon diminished through familiarity. The sudden bursts of flame were easily avoided because just before they struck there was a deep kind of popping sound clearly coming from the vicinity where the flames would then appear. Wesley carried his sword in his right hand, his long knife in his left, waiting for the first RUS, but none appeared. He had cut a very long piece of strong vine and coiled it over one shoulder and was busy working on it as they moved. What we'll do once I've got this properly done is... What we'll do once I've got the... That's what it says, he told her, moving steadily on beneath the giant trees. We'll attach ourselves to each other so that way, no matter what the darkness, we'll be close. Actually, I think that's more precaution than necessary, because to tell you the truth, I'm almost disappointed. This place is bad, all right, but it's not that bad. Don't you agree? Buttercup wanted to. Totally. She would have too, only by then the snow sand had her. Wesley turned only in time to see her disappear. Buttercup had simply let her attention wander for a moment. The ground seemed solid enough, and she had no idea what snow sand looked like anyway. But once her front foot began to sink in, she could not pull back, and even before she could scream, she was gone. It was like falling through a cloud. The sand was the finest in the world, and there was no bulk to it whatsoever, and at first no unpleasantness. She was just falling gently through this soft powdery mass, falling farther and farther from anything resembling life, but she could not allow herself to panic. Wesley had instructed her on how to behave if this happened, and she followed his words now. She spread her arms and spread her fingers and forced herself into the position resembling that of a dead man's float in swimming. All this because Wesley had told her to begin the more she could spread herself. Because Wesley had told her to, because the more she could spread herself, the slower she would sink. And the slower she sank, the quicker he could dive down after her and catch her. Buttercup's ears were now caked with snow sand all the way in, and her nose was filled with snow sand, both nostrils, and she knew if she opened her eyes, a million tiny fine bits of snow sand would seep behind her eyelids, and now she was beginning to panic badly. How long had she been falling? Hours, it seemed, and she was having pain in holding her breath. You must hold it till I find you, he had said. You must go into a dead man's float, and you must close your eyes and hold your breath, and I'll come get you, and we'll both have a wonderful story for our grandchildren. Buttercup continued to sink. The weight of the sand began to brutalize her shoulders. The small of her back began to ache. It was agony keeping her arms outstretched and her fingers spread, and it was all so useless. The snow sand was heavier and heavier on her now as she sank always down. And was it bottomless? So they thought when they were children. Did you just sink forever until the sand ate away at you, and then did your poor bones continue to trip forever down? No, surely there had to somewhere be a resting place. A resting place, Buttercup thought. What a wonderful thing. I'm so tired, and I want to rest. And Wesley, come save me, she screamed, or started to, because in order to scream you had to open your mouth, so all she really got out was the first sound of the first word. Whoa! After that, snow sand was down into her throat, and she was done. Wesley had made a terrific start. Before she had even entirely disappeared, he had dropped his sword and long knife, and had gotten the vine coil from his shoulder. It took him next to no time to knot one end around a giant tree, and holding tight to the free end, he simply dove headlong into the snow sand, kicking his feet as he sank for greater speed. There was no question in his mind of failure. He knew he would find her, and he knew she would be upset and hysterical and possibly even brain-tumbled, but alive. And that was, in the end, the only fact of lasting import. The snow sand had his ears and nose blocked, and he hoped she had not panicked, had remembered to spread eagle her body so that he could catch her quickly with his headlong dive. If she remembered, it wouldn't be that hard, the same, really, as rescuing a drowning swimmer in murky water. They floated slowly down. You dove straight down. You kicked. You pulled with your free arm. You gained on them. You grabbed them. You brought them to the surface, and the only real problem then would be convincing your grandchildren that such a thing had actually happened and was not just another family fable. He was still concerning his mind with the infants yet unborn when something happened he had not counted on. The vine was not long enough. He hung suspended for a moment, holding to the end of it as it stretched straight up through the snow sand to the security of the giant tree. To release the vine was truly madness. There was no possibility of forcing your body all the way back up to the surface. A few feet of ascension was possible if you kicked wildly, but no more. So if he let go of the vine and did not find her within a finger snap, it was all up for both of them. Wesley let go of the vine without a qualm, because he had come too far to fail now. Failure was not even a problem to be considered. Down he sank then, and within a finger snap he had his hand around her wrist. Wesley screamed then, himself, in horror and surprise, and the snow sand gouged at his throat, for what he had grabbed was a skeleton wrist, a bone only, no flesh left at all. That happened in snow sand. Once the skeleton was picked clean, it would begin often to float, like seaweed in a quiet tide, shifting this way and that, sometimes surfacing, more often than not journeying through the snow sand for eternity. Wesley threw the wrist away and reached out blindly with both hands now, scrabbling wildly to touch some part of her, because failure was not a problem. Failure was not a problem, he told himself. If it is not a problem to be considered, so forget failure. Just keep busy and find her. And he found her, her foot more precisely, and pulled it back to him. And then his arm was around her perfect waist, and she began to kick with any strength left, needing now to rise the few yards to the end of the vine. The idea that it might be difficult finding a single vine strand in a small sea of snow sand never bothered him. Failure was not a problem. He would simply have to kick, and when he had kicked hard enough, he would rise, and when he had risen enough, he would reach out for the vine, and when he reached out, it would be there, and when it was there, he would tie her to it, and with his last breath, he would pull both of them to life. Which is exactly what happened. She remained unconscious for a very long time. Wesley busied himself as best he could, cleansing the snow sand from his ears and nose and mouth, and most delicate of all, from beneath the lids of her eyes. The length of her quietness disturbed him vaguely. It was almost as if she knew he had died. She knew she had died, and was afraid to find out for a fact if it was true. He held her in his arms, rocked her slowly. Eventually she was blinking. For a time she looked around and said, "We lived then?" she managed finally. "We're a hardy breed. Are we good?"
Has it on his face.
"We're a hardy breed. What a wonderful surprise. No need," he was going to say, "no need for worry," but her panic struck too quickly. It was a normal enough reaction, and he did not try to block her, rather held her firmly and let the hysteria run its course. She shuddered for a time, as if she fully intended to fly apart. But that was the worst. From there, it was but a few minutes to quiet sobbing. Then she was Buttercup again. Wesley stood, buckled up on his sword, replaced his long knife. "Come," he said, "we have far to go." "Not until you tell me," she replied. "Why must we endure this?" "Now is not the time." Wesley held out his hand. "It is the time." She stayed where she was, on the ground. Wesley sighed. She meant it. "All right," he said finally. "I'll explain, but we must keep moving." Buttercup waited. "We must get through the fire swamp," Wesley began, "for one good and simple reason." Once he had started talking, Buttercup stood, following close behind him as he went on. "I had always intended getting to the far side. I had not I must admit, expected to go through. Around was my intention, but the ravine forced me to change. The good and simple reason, Buttercup prompted. On the far end of the fire swamp is the mouth of the giant Eel Bay, and anchored far out in the deepest waters of that bay is the great ship Revenge. The Revenge is the sole property of the dread pirate Roberts. The man who killed you, Buttercup said. That man, the one who broke my heart, the dread pirate Roberts, took your life. That was the story I was told. Quite correct, Wesley said. And that ship is our destination. You know the dread pirate Roberts? You are friendly with such a man? It's a little more than that, Wesley said. I don't expect you to quite grasp this all at once. Just believe it's true. You see, I am the dread pirate Roberts. I fail to see how that's possible, since he has been marauding for 20 years, and you only left me 3 years ago. I myself am often surprised at life's little quirks, Wesley admitted. Did he, in fact, capture you when you were sailing for the Carolinas? He did. His ship Revenge captured the ship I was on, the Queen's Pride, and we were all to be put to death. But Roberts did not kill you. Clearly. Why? I cannot say for sure, but I think it is because I asked him please not to. The please, I suspect, aroused his interest. I didn't beg or offer bribery as others were doing. At any rate, he held off with his sword long enough to ask, why should I make an exception of you? And I explained my mission, how I had to get to America to get money, to reunite me with the most beautiful woman ever reared by man, namely you. I doubt that she is as beautiful as you imagine, he said, and he raised his sword again. Hair the color of autumn, I said, and skin like wintry cream. Wintry cream, eh? He said. He was interested now, at least a bit, so I went on describing the rest of you, and at the end I knew I had him convinced of the truth of my affection for you. I'll tell you, Wesley, he said then, I feel genuinely sorry about this, but if I make an exception in your case, news will get out that the dread pirate Roberts has gone soft, and that will mark the beginning of my downfall. For once they stop fearing you, piracy becomes nothing but work, 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 all the time, and I am far too old for such a life. I swear I will never tell, not even my beloved, I said, and if you will let me live, I will be your personal valet and slave for 5 full years, and if I ever once complain or cause you anger, you may chop my head off, and then and there I will die with praise for your fairness on my lips. I knew I had him thinking. Go below, he said. I'll most likely kill you tomorrow. Wesley stopped talking for a moment and pretended to clear his throat because he had spotted the first RUS following behind them. There seemed no need yet to alert her, so he just continued to clear his throat and hurry along between the flame bursts. What happened tomorrow? Buttercup urged. Go on. Well, you know what an industrious fellow I am. You remember how I like to learn, and how I'd already trained myself to work 20 hours a day. I decided to learn what I could about piracy in the time left allotted me, since it would at least keep my mind off my coming slaughter. So I helped the cook and cleaned the hold, and in general did whatever was asked of me, hoping that my energies might be favorably noted by the dread pirate Roberts himself. Well, I've come to kill you, he said the next morning, and said, thank you for the extra time. It's been most fascinating. I've learned such a great deal. And he said, overnight? What could you learn in that much time? And I said that no one had ever explained to your cook the difference between table salt and cayenne pepper. Things have been a bit fiery this trip, he admitted. Go on. What else? And I admitted that there would have been more room in the hold if boxes had been stacked differently. And then he noticed that I had completely reorganized things down there, and fortunately for me, there was more room, and finally he said, very well, you can be my valet for a day. Never had a valet before, probably I won't like it, so I'll kill you in the morning. Every night the next year he always said something like that to me. Thank you for everything, Wesley. Good night now. I'll probably kill you in the morning. By the end of that year, of course, we were more than valet and master. He was a pudgy little man, not at all fierce, as you would expect the dread pirate Roberts to be, and I think I liked to think he was as fond of me as I of him, but then I had learned really quite a great deal about sailing and hand-fighting and fencing and throwing the long knife, and had never been in as excellent physical condition. At the end of 1 year, my captain said to me, "Enough of this valet business, Wesley. From now on, you are my second in command." And I said, "Thank you, sir, but I could never be a pirate." And he said, "You want to get back to that autumn-haired creature of yours, don't you?" And I didn't even have to bother answering that. A good year or two of piracy, and you'll be rich, and back you go. And I said, "Your men have been with you for years, and they aren't rich." And he said, "That's because they aren't the captain. I am going to retire soon, Wesley, and the revenge will be yours. I must admit, beloved, I weakened a bit there, but we reached no final decision. Instead, he agreed to let me assist him in the next few captures and see how I liked it, which I did." There was now another RUS following them, flanking them as they moved. Buttercup saw them now. "Wesley, shh! It's all right. I'm watching them. Shall I finish? Will it take your mind off them?" "You helped him with the next few captures," Buttercup said, "to see if you liked it." Wesley dodged a sudden burst of flame, shielded Buttercup from the heat. "Not only did I like it, but it turned out I was talented as well. So talented that Roberts said to me one April morning, 'Wesley, the next ship is yours. Let's see how you do it.' That afternoon we spotted a fat Spanish beauty, loaded for Madrid. I sailed up close," which is funny because Madrid is not a... It's a landlocked city, but whatever. "I sailed up close. They were in panic. 'Who is it?' their captain said. 'Wesley,' I told him. 'Never heard of you,' he answered, and with that they opened fire. Disaster. They had no fear of me at all. I was so flustered I did everything wrong, and soon they got away. I was, do I have to add, disheartened. Roberts called me to his cabin. I slunk in like a whipped boy. 'Buck up,' he told me, and then he closed the door, and we were quite alone. What I'm about to tell you I have never said before, and you must guard it closely." I of course said I would. "I am not the dread pirate Roberts," he said. "My name is Ryan. I inherited the ship from the previous dread pirate Roberts, just as you will inherit it from me. The man I inherited it from was not the real dread pirate Roberts either. His name was Cumberbund. The original dread pirate Roberts has been retired 15 years, has been living like a king in Patagonia." I confessed my confusion. "It's really very simple," Ryan explained. "After several years, the original Roberts was so rich he wanted to retire. Clooney was his friend and his first mate, so he gave the ship to Clooney, who had an identical experience to yours. The first ship he attempted to board nearly blew him out of the water, so Roberts, realizing the name was the thing that inspired the necessary fear, sailed the Revenge to port, changed the crews entirely, and Clooney told everyone he was the dread pirate Roberts, and who was to know he was not. When Clooney retired rich, he passed the name to Cumberbund, and Cumberbund to me, and I, Felix Raymond Ryan of Boodle, outside Liverpool, now dub thee, Wesley, the dread pirate Roberts. All we need is to land, take on some new young pirates. I will sail along for a few days as Ryan, your first mate, and will tell everyone about my years with you, the dread pirate Roberts. Then you will let me off when they are all believers, and the waters of the world are yours." Wesley smiled at Buttercup. "So, now you know. And you should also realize why it is foolish to be afraid." "But I am afraid." "It will all be happy in the end. Consider, a little over 3 years ago you were a milkmaid and I was a farm boy. Now you are almost a queen, and I rule uncontested on the water. Surely such individuals were never intended to die in a fire swamp." "How can you be so sure?" "Well, because we are together, hand in love." "Oh, yes," Buttercup said. "I keep forgetting that." Both her words and her tone were a trifle standoffish, something Wesley surely would have noticed had not an ROUS attacked him from the tree branch, sinking his giant teeth into his unprotected shoulder, forcing him to earth in a very unexpected spurt of blood. The other two that had been following launched their attack then too, ignoring Buttercup, driving forward with all their hungry strength to Wesley's bleeding shoulder. Any discussion of the ROUS, rodents of unusual size, must begin with the South American capybara, which has been known to reach the weight of 150 pounds. They are nothing but water hogs, however, and present very little danger. The largest pure rat is probably the Tasmanian, which has actually been weighed at 100 pounds, but they have little agility, tending to sloth when they reach full growth, and most Tasmanian herdsmen have learned with ease to avoid them. The fire swamp ROUSs were a pure rat strain, weighted usually 80 pounds, and had the speed of wolfhounds. They were also carnivorous and capable of frenzy. The rats struggled with each other to reach Wesley's wound. Their enormous front teeth tore at the unprotected flesh of his left shoulder, and he had no idea if Buttercup was already half devoured. He only knew that if he didn't do something desperate right then and right there, she soon would be. So he intentionally rolled his body into a spurt of flame. His clothes began to burn, that he expected. But more important, the rat shied away from the heat and the flames for just an instant. But that was enough for him to reach and throw his long knife into the heart of the nearest beast. The other two turned instantly on their own kind and began eating it while it was still screaming. Wesley had its sword by them, when with two quick thrusts the trio of rats were disposed of. "Hurry!" he shouted to Buttercup, who stood frozen where she had been when the first rat landed. "Bandages! Bandages!" Wesley cried. "Make me some bandages, or we die!" And with that he rolled onto the ground, tore off his burning clothes, and set to work caking mud and onto the deep wound in his shoulder. "They're like sharks, little blood creatures. It's blood they thrive on." He smeared more and more mud into his wound. "We must stop my bleeding, and we must cover the wound so they do not smell it. If they don't smell the blood, we'll survive. If they do, we're for it. So help me, please." Buttercup ripped her clothes into patches and ties, and they worked at the wound, caking the blood with mud from the floor of the fire swamp, then bandaging and re-bandaging over it. "We'll know soon enough," Wesley said, because two more rats were watching them. Wesley stood, sword in hand. "If they charge, they smell it," he whispered. The giant rat stood watching. "Come," Wesley whispered. Two more giant rats joined the first pair. Without warning, Wesley's sword flashed, and the nearest rat was bleeding. The other three contented themselves with that for a while. Wesley took Buttercup's hand, and again they started to move. "How bad are you?" she said. I am in something close to agony, but we cannot talk about that. We can talk about that later. Hurry now." They hurried. They had been in the fire swamp for 1 hour, and it turned out to be the easiest one they had of the 6 it took to cross it. But they crossed it, alive and together, hand very much in hand. It was nearly dusk when they at last saw the great ship Revenge far out in the deepest part of the bay. Wesley, still within the confines of the fire swamp, sank beaten to his knees. For between him and his ship were more than a few inconveniences. From the north sailed in half the great armada, from the south now the other half. 100 mounted horsemen, armored and armed. In front of them the Count, and out alone in front of all the 4 whites with the prince astride the leader. Wesley stood. "We took too long in crossing. The fault is mine." "I accept your surrender," the prince said. Wesley held Buttercup's hand. "No one is surrendering," he said. "You're acting silly now," the prince replied. "I credit you with bravery. Do not make yourself a fool." "What is so foolish about winning?" Wesley wanted to know. "It's my opinion that in order to capture us, you will have to come into the fire swamp. We have spent many hours here now. We know where the snow sand waits. I doubt that you or your men will be any too anxious to follow us in here, and by morning we will have slipped away." "I doubt that, somehow," said the prince, and he gestured out to sea. Half the armada had begun to give chase to the great ship Revenge, and Revenge alone was sailing, as it had to do, away. "Surrender!" the prince said. "It will not happen! Surrender!" the prince shouted. "Death first!" Wesley roared. "Will you promise not to hurt him?" Buttercup whispered. "What was that?" the prince said. "What was that?" Wesley said. Buttercup took a step forward and said, "If we surrender freely and without struggle, if life returns to what it was one dusk ago, will you swear not to hurt this man?" Prince Humperdinck raised his right hand. "I swear on the grave of my soon-to-be dead father and the soul of my already dead mother that I shall not hurt this man, and if I do, may I never hunt again, though I live 1,000 years." Buttercup turned to Wesley. "There," she said, "you can ask far more. You can't ask for more than that, and that is the truth." "The truth," said Wesley, "is that you would rather live with your prince than die with your love." "I would rather live than die, I admit it." "We are talking of love, madam." There was a long pause. Then Buttercup said it. "I can live without love." And with that she left Wesley alone. Prince Humperdinck watched her as she began the long cross to him. "When we are out of sight," he said to Rugen, "take that man in black and put him in the 5th level of the Zoo of Death." The Count nodded. "For a moment I believed you when you swore." "I spoke the truth. I never lie," the prince replied. "I said I would not hurt him, but I never for a moment said he would not suffer pain. You will do the actual tormenting. I will only spectate." He opened his arms then for his princess. "He belongs to the ship Revenge," Buttercup said. "He is—" she began, about to tell Wesley's story, but that was not for her to repeat. "A simple sailor, and I have known him since I was a child. Will you arrange that?" "Must I swear again?" "No need," Buttercup said, because she knew, as did everyone, that the prince was more forthright than any Florinese. "Come along, my princess." He took her hand. Buttercup went away with him. Wesley watched it all. He stood silently at the edge of the fire swamp. It was darker now, but the flame spurts behind him outlined his face. He was glazed with fatigue. He had been bitten, cut, gone without rest, had assaulted the cliffs of insanity, had saved and taken lives. He had risked his world, and now it was walking away from him, hand in hand with a ruffian prince. Then Buttercup was gone, out of sight. Wesley took a breath. He was aware of the score of soldiers starting to surround him, and probably he could have made a few of them perspire for their victory. But for what point? Wesley sagged. "Come, sir," Count Rugen approached. "We must get you safely to your ship." "We are both men of action," Wesley repeated. "Lies do not become us." "Well spoken," said the Count, and with one sudden swing he clubbed Wesley into insensitivity. Wesley fell like a beaten stone, his last conscious thought being of the Count's right hand. It was 6-fingered, and Wesley could never quite remember having encountered that deformity before. That is the end of Chapter 5. Yay!
We found the 6-fingered guy.
So, tomorrow begins Chapter 6, the festivities, and the first word is this. So, I hope you are enjoying the story. Go ahead and give it a thumbs up if you like the story, or a heart, or some kind of a something. The color is wrong on the camera. It might be tired. Okay, Mom says it looks fine. Maybe it's my eyes because I'm tired. All right, so I hope that you're enjoying the story. We'll be back tomorrow for more of The Princess Bride and Esther Chapter 7. So God bless you. Have a super night, and we will see you again tomorrow. Thank you.